So good morning, everybody. Nice and early. Welcome along to the session today. My name's Paul Lewis, Security Sales Leader at CSI. Thanks for joining us for this endpoint security session, designed and very focused around all things artificial intelligence and the art of prevention, and prevention being possible. As I said, for those of you that have not met me before, I'm Paul Lewis, Security Sales Leader at CSI, and hand in hand with Ignition Technology, who are the value-added distributor for the silence technology, we're going to walk you through this session this morning. So as far as an agenda is concerned, I'll go over some nice stats and facts around what's happening in the endpoint space and really delve into some of those numbers. I'll then touch on what the client challenges and risks are that we see every day within our customers and our prospect bases. Then we'll go into a very strong demonstration and a strong overview of the actual silence software. And Paul Risk, we're honored to have Paul Risk, who's the CTO of Ignition Technologies, on the session today. Paul, I won't steal too much of his thunder, but he was predominantly one of the major factors in bringing silence to the UK. So Paul will run through all things silence and run through the product demonstration. Then I'll touch on, right at the very end, the silence endpoint service itself that CSI offer. And then we'll go into some of those points around why CSI, why use us for this. So I'll jump straight in. The session's already recording, so as I say, we will send the content out after. And then any questions that you've got during the actual presentation itself, feel free to drop it into the questions section and we can answer those as we go. But we'll jump straight in. So as you can see on the screen, what we've seen across 2017, and a lot of these stats and facts come from a number of industry research reports. So the Verizon report, the Ponemon Institute research study reports, and Endpoint study that was carried out globally. Typically, the trust in traditional antivirus, it has dissolved over the last 5 years. With the fact that there are so many new threats available out there these days, the signature-based technologies just can't simply keep up with the rate of change. 7 out of 10 organizations reported last year that their endpoint security protection and the risk on those endpoints had significantly increased and the protection had actually reduced. And coupled with that, 4 out of 5 organizations had replaced, augmented, or totally changed their endpoint platforms. So with the way the threat landscape evolves, the fact that there are new threats being made available every day to those nasty threat actors out there, the existing technologies just can't keep up. We do know that managing existing technologies in this space is really difficult to keep updated. With the level and volume of threats that are out there, it's very difficult to keep people updated and keep systems updated. Analysts, IT specialists, SOC specialists, they are essentially alert fatigued with the alerts that they do get, as well as keeping up with that rate of change. I'll touch on now some of the client challenges and risks that we get, and there are probably more out there than what are on these slides, right? But what we want to do is just highlight the main ones that we see on a daily basis. Hopefully my screen has refreshed your sides, but there's your first one. There are so many great vendors, not only in the endpoint space, but in the cybersecurity and information security space. There are so many good vendors available, so many great solutions, different solutions that all offer something to you as far as improving your security posture. But this is essentially a picture of InfoSec right here. This is the challenge that customers first face when they want to improve their security. It's a great slide, it's a great visual, and it does give you a great indication. Where do I look and who do I go to? As covered in the first slide, the trust in traditional antivirus has eroded and it has dissolved. Not only that, but as I mentioned already, the keeping up with that rate of change and the variety, the scale of endpoints. There is this drive to the digital economy. There is this explosion with all things mobile and applications and cloud-based businesses. And keeping up with that constant change and the constant threat that that landscape provides to us as organizations, it's very difficult to keep up. Having access to accredited, certified, skilled staff, it's becoming a bigger challenge for organizations. There will be 1.2 million vacancies in the information security space in the next 2 years. So having access to staff that can cope with those updates, that can cope with those vulnerabilities and can make sense of the noise, again, it's a growing challenge. And as I've covered, alert fatigue. So what does that mean? Well, most of you will have technologies and pieces of kit or tin or a service running which provides alert and notifications, and keeping up with those alert notifications and making sense and finding that needle in the haystack, which actually is important for you, it's very, very difficult. And typically those types of systems provide too many alerts to keep on top of. And that really, in some aspects, goes hand in hand with no policy or no structure. You know, what is your IT strategy? What is your IT security strategy? What is your cloud strategy? And what are your policies around these types of solutions? And then the last point, I've mentioned it a number of times already, but simply keeping up with the rate of change, it's very, very difficult. The threat landscape's so big, vast and wide now that keeping up is very, very tough. So hand in hand with those risks, the challenges, comes the risks. There is an acceptance, a global acceptance over the last few years that it's not if we get breached, it is when. Somebody said to me just recently, there are two types of companies, those that know they've been breached and those that don't know they've been breached. So there is this acceptance now that something will get through, whether it's on the traditional antivirus platforms that can't keep up with the mounds and mounds of signatures that get created, or indeed the new threats that get through. Something will get in, something will get into the network and start to exfiltrate what it needs to. You've also got, coupled with that, the human side of things, the insider threat. 75% of issues are caused by insiders, whether they maliciously mean to, or indeed whether they accidentally misconfig or misclick on something. With the risk, there'll be loss of data, there'll be loss of IP. You even get, you know, shareholder value. At the time that the story breaks, you do get the loss of their shareholder value. You get CEOs and you get executives whose jobs become at risk at that stage. And the back of that, the data, the credentials stolen, and that keeping up with that story is very, very difficult. So as I mentioned, something will get through. There will be some sort of breach at some point, and it's how you handle that and how you move forward. So I'm now going to hand over to Paul Risk, who's the CTO of Ignition Technology, and Paul's going to run through all things Cylance for you. So Paul, over to you.
Lovely. Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everyone. As the slide says, and as Paul said, my name is Paul Risk, so not only do I have the best surname for somebody that works in cybersecurity, as Paul said, I'm also the CTO of Ignition. That basically means that over the last sort of 20 years I've been in this industry, I've looked at about 800 different vendor technologies, endpoint space, networking space, firewall space, you name it. So today we're obviously going to talk about the crazy world of endpoint protection. There's a lot of noise out there. I think Paul's alluded to this. There's a lot of vulnerable companies, a lot of vulnerable systems out there, and actually the signature-based technologies just don't keep up. So hopefully over the next sort of 20 minutes or so, you get a bit of a feel for actually what's happening in the market, a bit of a feel for how the Cylance technology approaches it, and I'll show you a couple of little demos at the end. A little bit more background. So when I first looked at Cylance about 4 or 5 years ago now, I was a big disbeliever. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded too good to be true. And in all honesty, I expect a lot of you on this call today to almost feel the same. So I would highly encourage anybody on this call today to pick up the phone afterwards or drop an email to your CSI account manager. Just do a little quick proof of concept. You know, we can do those in as short as a few hours if you want to. Just send you the little installer, you install it on a couple of your endpoints, let it do a read-only little low and slow background scan of all the files on your sort of system, and just sort of see what you think. And to give you an idea, 92% of all companies that have ever tried the Cylance product out have gone on to buy it. That is a global statistic from Cylance, and something that we've certainly seen in the UK as well. So I'll reiterate it at the end, but I highly encourage, listen to the story today and what we're going to tell you, but absolutely have a play with the technology and do your own testing, much like I did. So I built my own ransomware. I used some toolkits on the dark web as well. I take malware, I mutate malware. I have a little malware lab in our headquarters in Farnborough where we run all of the different AV vendors that we can get our hands on. And like I said, the proof is really in the pudding. And thankfully today, Paul's going to be my PowerPoint assistant. So Paul, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, let's start with a little question to get everybody's brains in gear. And obviously everyone's on mute on this webinar, so I don't expect anybody shouting out, but have a think to yourself, you know, have a think, how often is new malware released? You know, is it a few hundred different samples a day, a few thousand different samples a day? And again, Paul, if you hit the next button, The actual answer is if you go back to 1992, you were looking at about 200 new viruses, as they were called, back then per month. So if you've only got 200 new things to be aware of, signature-based technologies work very, very well. I've got to write 200 new signatures every month to protect all of my endpoints. It still means that you typically have a first infection, and unfortunately somebody is going to get hit by whatever that piece of malware or virus is, but then you've got a cure or an antidote afterwards. The problem is, and the reason the market has changed so much in the last few years, is you're looking at, actually this is a very conservative number, of 400,000 new samples every 24 hours. Actually, if you talk to people like Symantec, they believe it's well over 1 million. If you look at people like VirusTotal, it's about 500,000 new samples go on their site a day. So the point is, all the technologies you've bought and invested in and used in the past have been very, very good for their time. It's just that the time has now changed, which is why we need to look at new innovations. And again, Paul, if you hit the next button for me, that'd be wonderful. So this is one of the problems with signatures. So this has nothing to do with technology, but hopefully you're going to get the point across. If you look at this road sign or this street sign, it says, right, no bicycle riding, no rollerblading, no roller skating, no skateboarding, no scooter riding. Think of this as signatures on an antivirus piece of software that's saying, you know, I don't want to allow Dridex, I don't want to allow Locky, I don't want to allow WannaCry, I don't want to allow Petya or no Petya. And again, if you hit the next button again, Paul, so somebody literally just looks at, okay, what am I not allowed to do? What are the signatures that this product is aware of? And in this case, he's on a unicycle. So what would happen in the signature world is that you go and update this sign, and you'd now add no unicycles to the bottom of the sign. In the same way that when a new piece of malware comes out, all of the signature-based products have to go and write a signature for that piece of malware and add it to their product, which now means that every person running that technology around the world has to now download that new signature. So what happens is the next day, somebody comes along with a go-kart, let's say, and again you go back to the sign and you adjust the sign again. So it's very much a game of cat and mouse, and something is always getting through, as I said earlier, before you change that process. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense in terms of the way signatures work. And actually it's worth just saying as well that a lot of the sort of traditional products in this market right now are now saying they use AI and machine learning, but actually they're using AI and machine learning just to write better signatures. So instead of teams of humans writing it, they're letting the machines write the signatures, but it's still fundamentally the same problem. So that's definitely something to be aware of when you're looking at products in this space. Now this slide, really, there's only two things I want to highlight. So Verizon released these data breach investigations report every year. So this particular one, it said that malware was basically used in 90% of all cyber incidents that year. So if you genuinely are looking at how you protect yourself as a company, if you've got a decent solution for malware, then you're solving 90% of the problem. The thing that really blew my mind, and I didn't realize this until I tested these technologies myself, is that 99% of all the malware hashes were seen for 58 seconds or less. In fact, most is only ever seen once. What does that actually mean? Well, if you look at when WannaCry hit the UK, and in fact, it was one of CSI's customers that were using Silence that were hit first. In fact, they were hit the day before most of the media were talking about it. I forget the exact date now, but on the Friday was when most people talked about it. But actually, it hit this particular company on the Thursday, this particular NHS trust. Thankfully, they were running Silence and it blocked it. But the point is, if you take something like WannaCry, it wasn't just one version of WannaCry that came out. There were loads and loads of variants. In fact, I've got most of them on this laptop that I'm using today. So in fact, I can show some demonstrations of that as well. So the point is, different variants of the same family of malware are used over and over again. It's very rare that the same variant is used over and over. So yeah, most malware is seen for 58 seconds or less. So even if the process of writing signatures really, really quickly worked, within a minute, it's unlikely that you're ever going to get hit with that particular piece of malware using that particular signature. So thanks again, Paul. Next slide, please. So do we essentially have a better way of approaching this market? So we're now going to be talking about the massively overused term right now of artificial intelligence and machine learning. But these were some of the guys that pioneered this space. And again, I like to use this as a question. Anybody, you know, looking at that little circle on the screen right now, if I just said to you, what is this? Again, nobody unfortunately can shout out any answers. Hopefully most, if not all of you on this call would go, well, do you know what? It sort of looks a little bit like a giraffe. And you've got to ask yourself, if you think that is the case, why do you think that? And you would be absolutely spot on. It is a picture of a giraffe. And the reason is, again, if Paul would just go on one more slide, is that over the years, since you've been a small child, is every time you've seen a picture of a giraffe, or you've seen a giraffe at a zoo or a wildlife park, or you've gone to South Africa and seen them in the wild, or you've seen them on TV, your brain is basically extracting features of that animal. So it's taking the skin, the sort of fur and the pattern of that. It's taking the long legs, the long neck, the tail, the face, the ears, the hooves, whatever it might be. Your brain has extracted loads and loads of features of this particular animal. And imagine like cats and dogs as well. If you think about it, a cat and a dog, depending on the breed and the variety, actually look pretty similar. They're small animals on 4 legs. Actually, your brain is able to extract all the different features that makes a dog look like a dog and a cat look like a cat. So actually, you're able to, even if you don't know the breed of the animal, you're able to tell if something walks across the road in front of you, whether that is a dog or that is a cat. And you might be thinking, what on earth has this got to do with artificial intelligence and machine learning and malware? So again, Paul, if you just go to the next slide, I'll tell you basically how Cylance built their product, but it's essentially using that sort of concept. So if you go back to when they started the company back, I think about 2012, they took 500 million examples of good software and about 500 million examples of bad software. So you needed some good data sets. Step 2 was you needed some very, very clever people. So the first 15 data scientists that worked at Cylance had 36 PhDs between them. So an incredibly clever and probably quite geeky bunch of people. And then the third thing is that you needed a whopping great big supercomputer. So Cylance actually turned to AWS, and it was about 3,000 machines that they spun up in AWS in the early days. And in fact, they used something like a third of all the GPUs, the graphic cards, the graphic processing units in AWS every time they train one of their new models. So you basically got whopping great big supercomputer, very, very clever bunch of data scientists, and a great set of good and bad data. And in short, all they did is feed that data into the machine. And they said, right, machine, you've got one job. Go and figure out what makes the good files look good, what makes the bad files look bad. And in short, the Cylance sort of machine learning process spat out a little mathematical model. And that mathematical model basically figured out there's about 6 million features of a file that could mark a file as good or bad. So Cylance no longer needs to know about Tridex or WannaCry or Locky or Petya or NoPetya. It just knows a bad piece of software has these characteristics and these traits. A good piece of software has these characteristics, these traits, or these features, if you like. So going back to the dog and the cat, it's just looking at features to determine what that is, and it could classify it as a dog or a cat. Even if a brand new breed of dog or cat, came out tomorrow, it would still, the same way that you as a human would, be able to tell if that was a dog or a cat. So what does this all sort of mean? So again, Paul, if you just advance the next slide, this is some slightly complicated words on this sort of slide as it sort of builds, but basically what it means is if you take WannaCry, which is on the right-hand side of this screen, it says WannaCry 19 months previous. What it basically means is once you've got this mathematical model, which is this thin, lightweight little algorithm that now runs on all of your endpoints, all of your client machines, all of your server machines, whenever it's looking at a file, it literally runs this very quick algorithm and scores the file on a score between 0 and 100. So 100 means you're incredibly bad, 0 means you're incredibly good, and there's nothing wrong with you at all. That is the job now of that algorithm. That is why it is so lightweight on the endpoint, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about right at the end of this in just a couple of slides' time as a summary of the key differentiators of Cylance. But one of them is your laptops and computers and servers are just whopping great big calculators. They're very, very quick at processing these algorithms. So that's what runs on your endpoints. It's just this tiny little bit of software. And what it basically means when it comes to WannaCry, when WannaCry hit the UK last year, Cylance was blocking every single variant of WannaCry. In fact, it was the only product on the market to date that blocked every single variant of WannaCry that came out without needing any signature or update or change to the product. But the cool thing, and where that sort of minus 19 months thing comes in, is that I took an old version of Cylance from a couple of years previous. You could actually go back different versions because actually Cylance only releases a new version of the actual model about every sort of 9 to 12 months. So there's another benefit that, again, I'll summarize later, is that, you install this, there are no signature updates. You can be offline for months and months at a time and still have pretty much the same level of protection. But what I did when WannaCry came out, it was great that the latest version of Cylance was blocking all those variants, but I took all the variants I could get my hands on that hit the NHS and other companies around the world, and I went back in time and I just found different versions of the Cylance product. And you could go back 19 months ago. So 19 months before WannaCry was even a concept in someone's head, you could use the version of Cylance from 19 months ago, so getting on for 2 years, with no updates, no internet access, and take every single variant of WannaCry that hit the globe and actually drop it against that version of Silence, and you would have been protected. That is a mad and crazy concept, especially when you look at the other ones on this screen here. So Petya, 20 months, Satan, 18 months, etc., etc. So really, one of the other benefits of Silence is there doesn't need to be a first patient, a patient zero, if you like, and then we'll capture that malware, then we'll write a signature, and we'll protect everybody else. You can be protected without needing any internet access, without needing any updates at all, or certainly not for many, many months, and use a tiny amount of resources on your endpoint. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And again, please pull on to the next slide. We've got a little summary of the company coming up. So started back in 2012. Their first version of their model was actually it was something like 73% effective. And you might be sort of thinking, well, that doesn't sound very good. You know, a sort of AV product that is 73% effective. Just to put in perspective, and you'll see this later in some of the demos I'm going to show you in a bit, if you take most of the antivirus vendors that are in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and if you literally install them all on a Windows 10 machine, and you go and get a bunch of malware off of VirusTotal, and you maybe mutate that malware and just drop it on all those machines and try and run it all, you would be staggered at how little actually gets blocked, because you hear all these stats like 99.999% effective. Those things, I can actually tell you now how it happens, is that Silence were approached by one of the testing companies a few years ago, and they said, right, Silence, we'd like you to be part of our next round of AV testing. And Silence were like, well, this is great. This is perfect news. And the testing company said, well, it's going to cost you something like $20,000 to be part of the test. And Silence were like, okay, well, that's fine, but what's the $20,000 for? The testing company actually said, well, for that $20,000, firstly, you get to provide, obviously, the software, set up in the way you want with whatever configuration parameters you want. Secondly, you get to provide the samples of malware that we're going to use to test your product. You also get to define the testing methodology we're going to use to test it, and you also get first refusal on the document before we put it together, before we release it to the world. That is why every single vendor that you look at seems to report 99-point-something% effectiveness. It's absolutely ridiculous. In reality, and it doesn't matter which end user you talk to that has gone through this sort of process, and even go and look at Gartner's website and look at the peer insights, and you'll see people actually write real reviews from people that actually use and test the technology. Most vendors are anywhere from about 35 to 55% effective at best. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, and again, I would highly stress anybody on this call here to do your own testing, do your own research. It doesn't take that long to spin up a couple of virtual machines and test some different products out, including the Silence product. 35 to 55% effective is what most AV products are when you look at real-world malware and mutated malware and new samples and samples created using ransomware as a service kits on the dark web. So actually, if you bring the story back to when they started the company in 2012, that 73% effective was absolutely amazing. They were all high-fiving each other, apparently, the sort of 5 or 6 initial people involved in building some of the first test versions of that product. Silence now do not say they are 100% effective. They actually talk about 99.7% because they've taken that data from people like Dell that tested all of the market, including Dell using Dell SecureWorks to help create and use different malware from different customers. That's the figure that Silence talk about. So it's still not 100%. There is no silver bullet in security that's going to make everything absolutely wonderful for you. But without any shadow of a doubt, Silence is by far and away the best and most accurate anti-malware engine on the planet. Even the guy that writes the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Endpoint Protection has said, if you're looking for a product for pure prevention, nothing comes close to what Silence can do. So yeah, very cool product. Lots of customers around the globe now. It's over 10,000 customers and 15 million endpoints across the globe protected as well. Now, Paul, if you don't mind going to the last slide, we've got about 2 or 3 slides left before we see a demo. The 2 brains behind the organisation are these 2 on the screen. So you've got Stuart McClure and Ryan Permer. So Stu McClure on the left-hand side, he's the guy that started a series of books called Hacking Exposed many, many years ago. He started a business called Foundstone that was bought by eventually McAfee, and he was McAfee's global CTO for a number of years. And Ryan Perm on the right-hand side was the chief scientist at McAfee. And essentially the 2 got together, said to McAfee, we want to take this company in a new direction. At the time, McAfee said no, which is a decision they're obviously hugely regretting. And off Silence went and created the fastest growing cybersecurity company of all time. Double the number of customers of the likes of Palo Alto Networks and FireEye combined at the same stage of their existence, double the revenue as well. And in fact, a couple of years ago, Microsoft tried to buy Silence for $2 billion, and Silence said no. So it just goes to show what an incredible piece of technology they've actually built. Next slide, please, Paul. So second last slide before we see the product in action. This is a final summary of actually all the capabilities of the Cylance product. And again, today's webinar is to give you a bit of an introduction, a bit of an overview. But again, I encourage you to reach out to your CSI account manager or Paul or myself after this call, and we could do an in-depth discussion or a meeting with you about your specific environment. But really, these are the products. It starts on the left-hand side with Cylance Protect. That's the main one we're going to see in the demonstration today, which is the pure antivirus replacement technology. It's so lightweight that it can run alongside your existing product if you want to. It can be in a read-only mode if you want to from a proof of concept point of view. But very quickly what happens is people stick it on. If I look at the first 300 POCs that we did in the UK, it was 297 out of those 300 POCs that Cylance found bad stuff on people's network just in a read-only mode. So the typical process is that people get in read-only mode, people then very quickly turn it on into blocking mode to clear up the bad things that were found, and then typically they end up uninstalling their initial product, whatever it is they're running previously. And you gain back a huge amount of resources back on your endpoint laptop. More CPU power, more memory gets released, because a lot of these signature-based products are quite heavy in the way they integrate with an operating system. However, what I will say, in completely an unbiased way, is that what Cylance does is incredible. But if you're using some of these other suites to do things like drive encryption and URL filtering and other features, most people actually might continue to use those products for those particular features. Those are things that the Cylance product, it doesn't do right now. So that's the corporate version of the anti-malware solution. There is a home version called Cylance Smart AV. So in fact, you can actually go and buy that and use yourself. Apologies, Paul, if you don't mind just going back a slide. It looks like it's just advanced one on its own somehow. So you've got the Cylance Protect product, you've got the Smart AV home solution, you have Optics, which is Cylance's EDR technology. So again, if you want to get a full forensics trail of, okay, it was lovely that that file was blocked, but how did that file get there? What process started it? What network connections were open? Who was logged onto the machine at the time? I now want to query my entire estate for indicators of compromise, or who else might be running that process. That's where the Cylance Optics EDR technology comes in. So a very, very cool piece of technology, and that's now using some machine learning and AI on the endpoints as well. Services-wise, in all honesty, I would highly recommend taking something like Cylance as a managed service from somebody like CSI. They'll actually manage the whole thing for you. If you want, there are threat zero hunting services that can be done by Cylance and implementation services. But again, I would highly recommend the guys at CSI to run that for you. And there are things like compromise assessments and incident response services as well. So, if you're worried that you might have been compromised, again, get in touch with your CSI account manager and they can look at options for you. Or if you're currently having an incident, if you are seeing machines getting locked with ransomware, or you've got some funny things going on or some funny messages appearing, there are compromise assessment services, again, that can also be done to help contain these incidents and again look at what's going on. So again, do get in touch with your CSI account manager. Thank you, Paul. Final slide before the demo. So we've talked about a lot of different features. Ultimately, why do people end up buying the Cylance product? And it can be simplified into one of these three categories. It's either just the pure effectiveness of the product. Like I said, 300 POCs, 297 found bad things, and 92% of all people globally that have ever tried the Cylance product have gone on to buy it. So it's incredibly effective. And the likelihood, although we can't guarantee this, the likelihood is, based on the stats and the data, is that if you rolled out Cylance as a little short proof of concept on your estate, it is likely to find bad things. So it's incredibly effectiveness, its efficacy, if you like, as they talk about in the AV world, is pretty incredible. So it could be that. It could be the simplicity. So again, install this piece of software. You can be disconnected from the network for quite a long time. You're talking about an update to the model every 9 to 12 months. So things like, there's a test that we often do called the holiday test, which is, imagine that you took 2 weeks off holiday and you came back and you turned your laptop on. The first thing that's got to happen is you've got to have a whole load of signatures updated on your machine. Then it's probably going to want to run a full system scan because it now needs to use those new signatures and check everything on your machine. That could take quite a while to happen. And actually, if you're disconnected from the network, maybe you're on the beach with your laptop in the second week and somebody comes along with a USB stick with some malware on, you are going to be compromised. The nice thing about the holiday test with Cylance is, like I said, you can go 9 or 12 months without an update, be disconnected from the internet, no need to check in with Big Brother brain in the cloud, and actually be protected. So the simplicity and the ease of using the technology is often a big selling point for people. And finally, it could just be performance. Everybody Anybody under the sun, any size, any vertical, runs some sort of antivirus product. And actually, a lot of people aren't very happy. I think Paul said this earlier with their current sort of technology. So some people are like, do you know what? I just want something that's a bit more lightweight on the endpoint. So this is going to typically use about 1 to 2% CPU. Why is that? Because you're not applying millions or billions of signatures against every file. You're running a quick mathematical algorithm to score the file. And your computer is just a big calculator. So it's very, very efficient. About 40 megabytes of RAM is all that's sort of needed. So some people have even said the amazing thing about running Silence is our laptop battery life is just a lot longer, because actually we're using so much less CPU and RAM and writing to disk that actually just the batteries last longer. So there's some really bizarre, nice side benefits as well. So in summary, it could just be I want pure effectiveness. It could be I want simplicity of use and simplicity of ease for my people that are going to be running this sort of technology, especially if you take it as a managed service. Or it could be, again, the lightweight performance on the endpoints. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Thank you, Paul. On to the next slide. So what I would just encourage at this point is that, if you've got questions, pop them in that little questions panel or the chat panel. We'll make sure we address them when Paul's finished wrapping up, or whenever he wants us to run the questions bit in a moment. I've just got a couple of quick things I want to show you. I want to show you how easy it is for anybody on this call today to literally spin up their laptop this afternoon, install something like VMware or VirtualBox and get a Windows 10 machine up and running. Download, start with Windows Defender, then go through the entire Gartner Magic Quadrant of different products and install them one after the other, and just how easy it is to test malware. So if you hit the next button, please, Paul, I'll explain what's going to happen. We're going to show you how easy it is to mutate and pack malware. So this is a Windows 10 machine of old. We're going to use a tool called Mpress. Now, Mpress is free to download. It's just a packing tool. Now, in the first demo is we're going to take something that isn't malware. We're going to take Procmon, which is just a little Windows sysinternals utility for looking at processes running on a machine. And we're going to literally say, please run Mpress against Procmon. It takes a couple of seconds, and it's created a new version of the Procmon executable. So I'm going to call this Procmon 2. I'm going to put it back on the desktop alongside that original file. Now, if you look at these two files, so we're going to actually run the first version of Procmon. It's going to just run as Procmon does, and you can sort of see that it's just monitoring all the processes that are running on this machine. So we'll shut that down, and we'll look at the properties of that file. And then while we're doing that, let's just run Procmon 2, the one that we've just mutated using Mpress. And what you should find is that functionally, it is absolutely identical. If this was a piece of ransomware, it's still a piece of ransomware. If it's a keystroke logger, it's still a keystroke logger. But if you look at the properties of this file, it's very, very different. So a couple of things to look at on this screen. The size of those files is very different. The original file was about 2 megabytes in size. The new one just over 600K in size, so about a quarter of the size. And if you look at the hashes of those files, so the hash is like a unique identifier, which in fact a lot of vendors use these hashes as their signatures. They basically say, if you see the hash on the left that starts DB6A, then that's going to be WannaCry, for example. If you look at a hash on the file on the right-hand side, it looks totally different because it is a completely different looking file, albeit the functionality is identical. So again, Paul, if you hit the next button, I'll just show you the exact same thing now with a piece of malware. So on this occasion, we've run Mpress against a piece of Cerber ransomware. So we've got two versions of the file. We've got the original version and we've got the packed or mutated version. If we take the hash of the original file, copy that to the clipboard and paste it into something like VirusTotal, you will actually sort of see that it's going to come up on the screen, and it's going to say that of all the AV vendors on VirusTotal, I think it says 28 of the 56 would have marked that as bad. They would have marked it as Cerber, which is interesting because it shows you that a lot of the AV vendors wouldn't have stopped that piece of ransomware if you ran it anyway. If we now take the newly mutated one that we've just used using Mpress, search on VirusTotal, what we're going to see is the file has not been found. That doesn't necessarily mean that all the AV products in the world wouldn't have blocked it. It just means that nobody has ever submitted that to VirusTotal at all. But I can tell you now from experience, if you mutate 100 samples of malware, quite a lot of those will go through most products. It is that simple to do your own testing, which is scarily simple in all honesty. Thank you, Paul. Next slide again. So the next bit back to our sort of little menu is we're just going to show you some offline testing. So again, if you hit next one more time, I'll just explain what we're about to see on the screen. So the day that I did this testing, and we can do this any day of the week that we want to, we'll just go onto VirusTotal, get 100 samples of ransomware. And actually with some of the things and queries you can do for VirusTotal, you can specifically choose ransomware. You can pick operating systems. You could do documents. You could do PowerShell scripts, whatever you want to do, different file sizes. Mutate all 100 of those samples using Mpress, as you've just seen on the screen. And then when I did this test, I tested it with the current version of Silence at the time. That, by the way, the samples I chose were a week old, so you've given a week for all the AV vendors to update their signatures as well. So test it with the current version of Silence, test it with an old version of Silence, and then I chose 2 of the top 3 Gartner Magic Quadrant leaders. Now, it's worth noting that, again, Gartner don't test technologies when they build their Magic Quadrant. They go based on company reviews that are using those sort of technologies. Very different to the way that some of the other analysts do their sort of testing. So the reason I can't tell you on this webinar exactly who those vendors were is that most of the vendors over the last 2-3 years have changed their end user license agreements, so you can't use their product for public testing because basically they know that it's not going to work very, very well, which is again another reason why I would encourage everyone on this call to do your own testing. All of the machines were then updated with all of the signatures and patches and whatever else we had to update, and then we disabled the internet connection. So if you hit the next button one more time, please, Paul. When I ran this test, we basically had 4 virtual machines running at the same time. And the reason there were some big black blocks on the right-hand side is just to hide the vendor names. Up the top left was the up-to-date version of Silence. The bottom left was a version of Silence from November 2015, so a couple of years old. And then we had AV Vendor 1 and AV Vendor 2 on the right-hand side. And again, if you hit the next button again, please, Paul. I won't show the whole video because it was too difficult to block out everything, but the results of this video that ran is we just dropped both folders of malware onto the machines. We monitored the CPU usage and memory usage as this sort of went through. And as we can see, it started with Silence up the top left. It actually, on this occasion, blocked 100% of the known and it blocked 100% of the known and 100% of the mutated malware. The old version of Silence from a few years ago did miss some samples, so it missed 6% of the 1-week-old known malware off of virus total, and it missed 5% of the brand new stuff that I basically created at that particular point. So still very impressive for a product that hadn't had an internet connection, had been updated for quite a few years. Vendor 1, bearing in mind that these 2 on the right-hand side are Gartner Magic Quadrant top right leaders, Vendor 1 missed 8% of the malware that was a week old, and it missed 25% of the mutated malware. Now, I should actually say that particular vendor down the bottom right had several different tools and technologies running at the same time because they'd acquired a few different companies, so it was running a number of agents. It was actually 20 different processes that were running on that machine, and it still missed a quarter of the stuff that I created with a simple little batch file. So no real clever 0-day stuff I had to create at all. The vendor up the top right is very similar to the other vendor that is in that Gartner Magic Quadrant top right. They often miss quite a lot. So they missed 83% of the malware that was a week old that is known about. And it missed 96% of the malware that I just created using Empress, which, as you saw a moment ago, is a very rudimentary, very simple tool to run. So what you've got to think about and what to take away from what you're seeing on the screen right now is that whatever technology you're running in your environment right now, as I said, back in the day, that could have been the absolute best thing on the market and the absolute best fit for your organization based on the operating systems and budget and the vertical you're in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The market has just moved on. So I would highly, again, stress this point. I would suggest speaking to CSI, doing a very quick proof of concept that we can run very, very quickly on your endpoints, do a little read-only scan, and it is often quite frightening what has been seen. We've literally seen keystroke loggers on the CFO's machine or banking Trojans, people with the ability to remotely turn on people's webcams and watch what they're doing, remotely take screenshots, dormant ransomware. There's a whole heap of stuff that potentially you could find, bearing in mind that the 2 vendors on the right-hand side are Gartner Magic Quadrant top right. And again, rightly or wrongly, a lot of people believe that if you buy what is in the Gartner top right of their quadrant, you're doing the right thing. And the reason is not everyone can spend the time doing some testing. Absolutely, I would do a little proof of concept of this product. Thank you very much. Next slide, please, Paul. So we can do Q&A now, or we can leave it right to the end, depending on how you want to run things.
Yeah, that's nice. That's brilliant, Paul. Really, thanks for that. That was a great session. Really, really insightful, especially in regards to the history of Silence, where it came from, who created the organization, how they've grown, and indeed, obviously, what it stops, blocks, and protects companies from. So there are no questions in the inbox at the moment. So I think what I'll do is, if any pop up, I'll plow forward with the next few slides. And there's only a handful left, so if any questions come up, I can get those answered very, very quickly. And we can always go back. We will be doing follow-up after the session anyway with the people that have attended. So I'll plow forward. Thank you, Paul. So the final session. So for those of you on the call that don't know what sort of service that we offer for this, as Paul's mentioned, the Silence platform it utilizes artificial intelligence and machine learning to predict what's good and what's bad, essentially. The core focus is around proactively protecting rather than reactively detecting and having that patient zero. So the levels of efficacy, as Paul mentioned, they go from around the 60 or 70% marker with a traditional technology up to 99.7 with the silence-based technology. So really, it's a real leap from where you may be today with a traditional tech to where you could be with a technology like silence. The platform itself, it is an industry leader, the fastest growing cybersecurity company ever. And that takes into consideration the likes of Palo Alto and some other leading vendors. So that's really, really great. And the service that CSI offer, for those of you that don't know, we run a 24/7, 365 security operations center. We've got a team of specialist analysts in the SOC that basically have eyes on glass on the UI for the silence platform on a minute by minute basis. We have an awful lot of threat intelligence which gets pumped into the security operations center, and not only do we use AI and machine learning to help obviously protect you guys as far as the silence technology is concerned, but we also use orchestration in the stock as well to help protect our customers and share threat intelligence wherever we can. From a consumption model point of view, we've moved with the marketplace, so we can just simply resell licenses. We can quite simply ultimately get a quote from the guys at Silence and then sell out to you. But where we offer the huge value is in that fully managed service space. So we'll basically manage, monitor, and maintain the platform for you from the SOC, being run by those highly certified, highly skilled security analysts, and that's across the 24/7 basis. So that's the consumption model, and from a managed service point of view, that's where we add huge value as CSI. Final piece, why would you use us in this space? So we'll drastically improve the protection on your endpoint estate with that silence technology. As Paul mentioned, the footprint between 1% and 2% CPU, it's a huge improvement versus traditional technologies. I was with an enterprise recently that ultimately had a global deployment of a specific technology, and it wasn't the predictive or preventative nature of silence that was of interest. It was the fact that they had tens and tens of thousands of endpoints which they could reduce the footprint from, and that's what the real interest was in. The product itself doesn't require an always on connection, as we call it, so it works on and offline. So irrespective of sickness, of holiday, of being away from the business for specific amounts of time, there is no latency, there's no requirement for that always on connection, and the solution and the service will protect you whether you're at work, in work, on holiday, etc. The instant access to the highly skilled analysts within the SOC is a brilliant point. I mentioned earlier about 1.2 million vacancies in the space. We're really lucky at CSI to have a raft of services and a raft of highly skilled people that work for us, and we'd like to share that with our customers to provide the additional levels of protection. And as I've mentioned, the solution and the service are designed to proactively protect and provide prevention, and that was the whole key, and the whole theme for today was prevention is possible with something like the silence technology, with the service from CSI. Last couple of points. So just some key points in relation to reducing endpoint risk across 2018. We've seen that 4 out of 5 customers have moved, changed, or augmented their existing platforms. So the driver is to move beyond traditional AV, and whether that means acquiring something like a silence technology or a silence service to complement the existing platform, or indeed do a total rip and replace. The move beyond traditional AV is happening. Things like fileless techniques, that's becoming more and more used across the industry. Reducing that complexity now, not only in deployment, not only in update, but also in the ongoing management of that endpoint technology. There's some key strategies that we're seeing more and more companies use. And the final point on focusing on prevention first before detection and response. So having that patient zero is not something that companies should be accepting, and you shouldn't be wanting somebody to be basically affected by a new string of ransomware, a new string of malware first. Prevention is possible in this space. So there are just some remediation strategies for 2018. On the screen, you've got a handful of customers that CSI are partnered with, whether they're using us for security or all things CSI. And unless there's any other questions, I'm just looking in the question box here. to see if there's any that's come up. So I've got one here from somebody on the screen. You might be able to see that, guys. Maybe one for you, Paul. Have Cylance consolidated their agents, protected optics in a single agent? So I know that that's coming out, right?
Yeah, indeed. So great question. So the short answer is yes. The code name for the project is Cocoon. The guys at Cylance actually got access to Cocoon about 2 weeks ago, as in the sort of pre-sales team within Cylance. And the last date I heard is it is meant to be in November, which is literally obviously only a few days away, but let's give them a bit of time. So, you know, in theory, within the next few weeks, you should have access to Cocoon, which is, like I said, the code name, which is both agents in one. That's also going to be the platform moving into, so hopefully in December this year, we should see the first alpha and beta releases of their product called Identity. It's actually being called Persona now. They've just changed the name to Cylance Persona. So because Cylance call themselves an AI and machine learning company, not specifically just an endpoint antivirus company, what they're going to be doing with Identity is, or Persona as it's now called, apologies, is that it's actually going to be monitoring how you use your machine. So actually, all of us type on a keyboard differently. All of us move a mouse, even on a trackpad. If we told us all on this call to move the trackpad from left to right, we all move our finger differently across there. Basically, it's going to be using AI and machine learning to even watch what you do on your endpoint, what applications you run, and actually we'll be able to figure out if it's you on the machine or not. So, you know, you're trying to get to a point. So Stu McClure, the CEO, wants to try and get to a point where you could almost move away from usernames and passwords, which is a pretty big bold claim, but it's quite cool that now it'll even be using that machine learning and AI to even learn you as a person as you use the machine. And that's again going to be that one single agent, all part of that sort of Cocoon project. So that was a long-winded answer for me, basically saying in November.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Paul. I've not seen any more questions come in, so I think unless any pop in the next few seconds, I want to thank everybody that have basically attended the session today. We will be sending out the content. We'll trim down and edit the video itself so that you've got that as a piece of accessible content. But I want to thank everybody today, including our value-added distributor partner, Ignition Technology, and Paul Risk for presenting on the Cylance technology. Thank you to everyone that attended. And as I say, any questions that you've got, feel free to reach out to me. We'll be doing follow-up on the back of the session. But thanks very much, and I hope this helped. You'll get access to the content fairly shortly. But thank you very much.